I'm Amber Bennett, and it's my sincere pleasure and privilege to welcome you to AHPA's first Herb Talk. AHPA is celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2022, and to honor the special occasion, we are super excited to be bringing together AHPA founders and friends for our new video series. As Vice President of Marketing and Engagement, the subject of the first Herb Talk is something I am proud to know a thing or two about: women in leadership. AHPA has a long history of fierce female leaders, including our guests today, LYNDA LEMOLE, PEGGY BREVOORT, and Caroline MacDougall. LYNDA LEMOLE has been an herb industry leader since 1982, when she joined AHPA and became board secretary while president at Traditional Medicinals. She served as AHPA president from 1986 to 1990 and was the first woman to lead AHPA in that role. PEGGY BREVOORT first became involved in the herbal industry in 1971 when she and her late husband Bill founded East Earth Herb. PEGGY served as AHPA president from 1990 to 1994, immediately following LYNDA. A pioneer to the herb industry, Caroline MacDougall began her career at Celestial Seasoning in the 1970s and was actively involved with AHPA before it was AHPA. More information about these incredible trailblazing women can be found in the description for this video. But without further ado, let's dive into this discussion about their experience as women in the herbal industry, what it was like to lead AHPA in the early years, and their advice for women everywhere now.
Hi, welcome to AHPA's Women in Leadership, part of the AHPA Talks, Herbal Talks. Well, I'm going to call this an herbal tea party, okay, because it's three wonderful friends and women from the AHPA world and the AHPA history, and we're going to get together for a tea party, talk about some old days, talk about how that works today, because there's such an excitement going on in the herb industry with so many more women than we got to play with back in the old days. So I'm LYNDA LEMOLE. I'm AHPA's first woman president, and I'll get to tell a little of my story in a little bit. But the first woman that we should hear from is Caroline MacDougall, who was part of the very first Herb Trade Association called the HTA back in the 70s. And she's going to introduce us to the earliest recorded history that we have of an herb association, and certainly of women's involvement and what that looked like back in the 70s. So Carolyn, tell us the ancient history.
You know, I wish I could remember it as well as I should, right? We never wrote it down back then. And we're talking about the early 70s, because I was 21 when I joined Celestial Seasonings. And, you know, I say this, I think it's true, but I don't really know it's true. I was like the fifth employee, right? You know, but maybe there were more, maybe there were less. I have no idea. We were very small at that time. And Celestial was this little fledgling company. And so was the whole herb trade. And I think what people now should realize about then is that there really wasn't an herb trade. There were some pharmaceutical companies that were bringing in, you know, herbs for extract. And that's where we actually went to buy herbs. I mean, I went to Merck, you know, originally to buy herbs. Can you imagine? I mean, you guys can't imagine, but nobody else who listens to this will be able to imagine that, right? And they were the only ones bringing in any botanicals. They were bringing in for extracts. And so then this, you know, this group of, look, we were all hippies, let's just face it, right? And we were all out picking herbs. We were, you know, experimenting. And we have all heard the story of Mo Siegel, you know, picking herbs in the mountains and then, you know, putting them in little bags. And I met Mo when he and Peggy, his wife, came to this natural food store that I was working for a summer in while I was going to college, right? And it was called New Age Natural Foods, of course. And it was in Palo Alto, California. And, you know, I met Mo there selling these tiny muslin bags. This was bulk. This wasn't tea bags, right? Little muslin bags that that were being hand stamped with the Sleepy Time bear on it and all that kind of thing. And that really was the beginning of, at least as far as I know it, of the herb trade, you know, here in America, because then other companies were rising up. Remember, there was Mountain Herbs, wasn't it Mountain Herbs, Linda?
Green Mountain.
No, there was Green Mountain, but there was also Mountain Herbs.
Oh.
So Green Mountain was a wholesaler that grew up around Boulder. But there was a company out in California, maybe it was Mountain Rose. No, Mountain Rose exists now. Oh, well, I can't remember, but it was Mountain something. And there was a great guy that ran it. It's terrible that I don't have this really good memory for all these names and details, but I don't. And so all these little companies were coming up, and we all of a sudden decided that we should get together in Santa Cruz, where Ben Zarecor was with Famali. And he was selling ginseng, hadn't gotten into Good Earth tea or any of that. And Mark Blumenthal, who has, as we all know, American Botanical Councils, he was selling, you know, I don't really remember his herb connection, because I remember him early as selling hot cha-cha.
Sweetheart Herbs.
Sweetheart Herbs. But did Sweetheart Herbs come before or after the hot cha-cha salsa? Because remember when before. Okay, good. He was Sweetheart Herbs. Linda, I'm going to need your brain to remember all these things. This is great. And so we got together for this very first meeting and decided we were going to form the Herb Trade Association. So the problem with all of us was we were all really young, and we all just had so much entrepreneurial, like, you know, energy, and we just fought like mad with each other. And we fought so much that we couldn't decide on who was going to be the first president. I have to actually say, let's face it, girls, it was the boys that were fighting, right? There was egos, like the Green Mountain Herb guy. I mean, he jumped up on a desk in one meeting and jumped up and down on top of the desk, screaming and yelling. I mean, there were fights that went on like you couldn't believe. But we formed this association, and we had 3 presidents, and I was one of them. I was the female, and there were 2 males. There was Mark Blumenthal, and Barry Metzler, rest in peace, who's no longer with us. And Barry had started San Francisco Herbs, right? Uh-huh. So it was the 3 of us that finally everybody could agree we 3 could be the presidents. Can you imagine? And it was a wild time. I was traveling a lot for Celestial Seasonings, because that was when we first developed the imports. You know, we went beyond Merck, obviously, and we went further afield. We went to these various countries. I went to these various countries and started finding herb exporters, because it's not like now. I actually wrote letters to embassies saying, and I had this really sweet little floral, nice little, Celestial Season to the top with stars and things like this on my stationery. And I'd write these letters like to the Egyptian embassy saying, you know, do you have anybody that you know who's growing, you know, chamomile? Or I'm serious. And then I signed the letters, you know, I signed them with this. I can't remember, but it was like, may the pure light shine upon you, all love. You know, it was one of those. Seriously, I did. We were dressing in granny dresses. Remember the granny dresses that went full length, you know, in the little umpire waist, you know, and I was carrying Celestial Seasoning teas around in wicker baskets, you know, and going into, because first I sold for Celestial before I started buying. Peggy, I'm cracking you up. I would go into these little stores with my little baskets and the little, you know, and it was all loose leaf. There was no tea bags yet, you know, hold it under people's noses and say, sniff this, isn't this wonderful? And our mission was to bring herbs to the American people. And look at what we have done, ladies, right? Yeah. I mean, it started there, and that was the stated mission of Celestial Seasonings. We were going to bring the benefit, the health benefits, the wellness, the wonderful parts that we knew nobody in America knew anything about. Because again, flashback, the tea section in a grocery store, floor to ceiling, Orange Pico, 3 brands, Lipton's, White Rose or Red Rose, whatever they were, some rose, and Bigelow's just came along. The most extraordinary thing was Bigelow's came out with Constant Comment. It was a blend. It was the very first blend to hit America, you know, at that time.
So Carolyn, when you were at that early HDA meetings, were there any other women in the room?
I think Susan Patterson came to one with me. We all know Susan. She worked for me at Celestial. She was part of my team. So I think she probably came to a meeting or 2 with her vibrant red hair and her, incredible pizzazz. But the very earliest ones, probably nobody but me, because Celestial didn't come along. I mean, Susan didn't come along in Celestial until a little later. Yeah. It was all men and they were yelling at each other.
Yes,
So one of the companies that was in that, we thought, wow, we really have to get this company to the Herb Trade Association, because we had a meeting in Colorado and we hosted it as Celestial. The really important company to get there was Select Herbal Teas. Do you remember Select? There was Select and Alveda, and they both had green and white boxes, and they did the single herb teas. And they were the big herb companies. Celestial was a tiny company compared to Select and Alveda. And we really wanted to get those guys there. And I remember when the guy from Select came, I ended up knowing him over many years, and now I can't think of his name, but Linda, you might remember it. Anyway, he arrived and he was like so full of himself in terms of how successful and how important they were, and were they going to put any energy into this fledgling little herb, started by these hippies, Herb Trade Association, And I just remember it's like, wow, we have Select here. We're really coming along, so it was all men, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, how is it that you were the one representing Celestial? Were you asked, did Mo ask you to be the representative, and how come he wasn't there? I mean,
but I was the herb buyer. And so I was the one that was into herbs. I mean, Mo and John got me to, John was Mo's partner, right? Mo and John got me to join the company and move to Boulder, because I was living in California selling the teas into, I was selling the teas into various natural food stores and Safeway and things like that for about a year. And then they said, come back to Boulder because you're the one that cares about the herbs, and we need you to buy the herbs and, and take over that thing. And I really didn't want to go back to Boulder because I was living on this fabulous goat farm and looking over the Pacific Ocean and, up anyway, it was great, but I left.
I see. Were you at the last HTA meeting, which was in August of 1981? That was their last hurrah. Were you there?
I may have been. I had just returned from Europe in 1980, in sort of mid 1980. So I don't remember that last meeting. I was gone in Europe for a while because I left Celestial in 77, I think. Anyway, and moved to Europe. And so I lived in Europe until mid 80. So I'm not sure if I was there for that last one.
Right, because you were not in the herb industry when HTA had its sort of spectacular end, and then when AHPA actually started in 1982. So you weren't.
No, I was I was in the herb industry, but I was developing herbal teas. So I wasn't really taking part in the trade part, and I was pregnant and having a baby. So I was doing all those things. I was working for Yogi Tea at the time, at that 81, 82 period. I took Yogi Tea from being in, a bulk, you had to boil it for 20 minutes in milk, that kind of thing, into a tea bag. And so I was working with Yogi Tea. Yeah. Yeah. And then I subsequently was working with BENNETT, and that's what got me back into the Herb Trade Association, which was then AHPA. Yeah.
Right. All right. Wow. Well, that kind of moves us into the early AHPA beginnings, which actually started in 1982. And after HTA was sort of gone, there was definitely a void. And at that time, in the early 80s, 79 to 80, lots of herb companies were beginning to happen. And FDA was beginning to give us trouble. In fact, that was kind of at the beginning of Ben Zarakar from Famali's famous lawsuit about trying to get information from other countries allowable to prove the safety of herbs, because that's really what our very first hurdle was. Let's just prove to the world that we're safe enough to be out there on the shelves. And so somewhere in late 81 and 82, AHPA at a trade show, the same kind of cast of characters, Mark Blumenthal and Lauren Israelson and Jimmy Adelson, and there were kind of a core of about 10 companies that actually saw the benefit and the need to keep a trade association going. And so that first AHPA meeting, It was all men. I was not there. I was not there yet. I was yet to come along. And it was all men. And then, like you say, they were arguing. They couldn't decide who was president. Actually, none of them wanted to be. And Peter Landis, who had KHL Flavors out of New York, he was an importer of herbs and spices. And he loved coming out to California to the trade shows because he's an inveterate golfer. And he always loved golfing with the herb guys. So he went out of the room and to smoke a cigarette. And when he came back, he was president of AHPA.
Of course, that's how it happens.
Exactly. So that's how that first meeting actually happened. And Peter was great. He was very good at delegating. So he did get Lauren and Jimmy Adelson as treasurer, Lauren as vice president, and they began to form this pretty loose association. And I attended the second herb meeting, board meeting, which took place the night before the trade show in 1982 in Peter Landis's hotel room, which had been kind of set up with a bar, and everybody just plopped on the bed, and there was a lot of smoke in the room, and it was really a loose meeting. Now, I had joined Traditional Medicinals, and I was pretty serious about getting herbs on the shelves and getting medicinal herbs legalized. So I was a very early defender of, we have to tell the story about what these herbs do. We can't sell senna leaf with just a picture of an outhouse on the bag. We really need to warn people about this. You know, I grew up in a pharmacy. My uncle was a pharmacist, and my father's dental office was right above that. And so I had learned early on about early pharmacy compounding, and I was very kind of fitted into the medicinal herb world for that reason. And so I was immediately appointed secretary of the board, and that was my first job. And so I began organizing, which is something I think women are very good at. I think certainly many men are also, but if you're the only woman in a room of 10, 15 men, you're the one taking notes, at least back in 1982. And as I said, I was pretty serious. I was like, we have to get this association going. We need to do a whole lot, and for starters, it was really about safety. So I began working with Peter and the board. And then in 1986, I was elected president, of course, because this is a job nobody really wanted. Because I want to point out what's so important about these early associations, and that is that this was volunteer work. As you said, Carolyn, we all had our day jobs. We were either working for companies that were growing every day, and there was so much to do, and we were volunteering big chunks of our time to do kind of big jobs. Talk to the FDA, put together a list of common names, get herb standards going, defend herbs that were being attacked by FDA. There was very serious attacks on this little industry of, as you said, Carolyn, hippies and Mormons that were very serious about growing this industry. So as president in my early days, 1986 to 1990 were my years, there were only about a core of 25 companies that really paid their $200 dues to be part of this association. And luckily, we had very committed people like Timothy Moley, who worked for Traditional Medicinals also, and was involved in putting the list of common names together. I mean, we didn't even have nomenclature figured out yet. And there were plenty of arguments about each one of those as well. There was tremendous passion, and there was tremendous commitment, and so much idealism that this volunteer sacrifice that we all contributed, really was an act of love and idealism and passion. So we were very involved with herb safety, as I said, and Rob McCaleb was, I believe, working for Celestial, but
Yes.
he put together the first herb safety committees because they're, you know, the FDA was out there with the list of 27 herbs, which were, you know, very common herbs that, you know, herbs that are sold today at 7-Elevens, but back then they were considered dangerous, toxic herbs. FDA was publishing their FDA consumer magazine with, you know, skull and crossbones on it over a cup of steaming herb tea. So, you know, it was, as I keep saying the word serious, but it was very serious business. We were going to be put out of business if we could not prove the safety. So I know today it's a lot about what can we say about these herbs? What are the claims that we can make? And so if you're working for an herb company today, you're talking about you know, efficacy and research, and none of that was available to us, you know, until the Famali versus Heckler case was one about allowing foreign information to be used just to prove a history of common use in a country. You know, we just didn't have a whole lot of herb research. So Rob McCaleb's early work with the Herb Research Foundation was tremendously important. So during my reign as president, it was a lot about getting administration together, certainly getting people begging herb companies to please come to our meetings, to please pay their $200, which eventually went up to $400, you know, membership fees. And there were, for the first 3 years, kind of almost no women really working on committees. Peggy BREVOORT, who we're going to hear from very soon, was the first woman that I got to work with who began working on committees, and who I finally begged to please become president after my 4-year stay. It was actually a very important role for women because the men were very busy with the business. They were very busy with the politics. Thankfully, they were very busy with, you know, helping us contact FDA. We had lots of, you know, early lawyers like Bill Pendergast, who helped us get our early meetings with FDA just to get us recognized. You know, in those days, it was very hard to be recognized as a trade association, a serious trade association that wanted to be able to bring research to the FDA. And so we had to work for, you know, a couple of years before we could actually even get a meeting with these folks. In the meantime, as I said, we're putting together list of calming names where, you know, we're defending herbs like ginseng, ephedra, stevia, lobelia. We were considered unsafe food additives. Many of the herbs that Carolyn uses in her blends, that I used in my blends at Traditional Medicinals, they were considered unsafe food additives. We not only could not say what they did, you know, we were being embargoed, and we were being, there were lots of trials. The good part of that is that it got companies to circle the wagons and join us. And so the threats that were happening to the herb industry in the early 80s actually contributed to the blessing of more and more companies coming on board. And so by the time Peggy became president in 1980, we actually had some law going into effect, you know, the NLEA and eventually DSHEA, but we didn't have any laws that allowed us to do any kind of claims. As I said, it was about identification, it was about safety, and it was about recognition, and it was about Mark Blumenthal used to always talk about circling the wagons and let's all come together, because that was really our only hope, to be able to talk to FDA and to be able to join together to promote in the trade magazines and media more and more educative articles about the safety of herbs, the effectiveness of herbs. And we had the challenge of talking to the retailers. You know, we had early retailers like Sandy Gooch, who was an amazing advocate for herbal safety and herbal education. And I mean, women played very important roles in those early years. The men, I kind of look at them as, you know, they were the warriors. They were out there certainly with the battle cry. And the women were right there organizing, defining, clarifying, moving things along. You know, it's not unlike what families are like, really, if you think about it. And so, you know, it felt very natural. And because we all shared so many values of the natural world, a lot of us got into herbs because we were eating natural foods. A lot of us didn't want to take pharmaceutical drugs. We wanted to change the world to a more natural, a greener, a safer world. And so every time you met someone in the herb world, you had so much in common, you know. As you said, we're all hippies, Carolyn. Michael McGuffin said they were hippies and Mormons. And that's kind of how the herb world started, you know. So I ended my reign in 1990, and I continued to work with AHPA because I was the representative from my tea company, Traditional Medicinals. But Peggy BREVOORT had been working on committees in AHPA, and I really felt like it was important that another woman really do that. And I remember the conversation. Peggy wanted to do it, but she also had her own company and she was very busy. And she was also, I don't know about this leadership with this gang of guys, and I don't know if I want to do this. And I literally begged her. And I said, I'll be there. I'll support you. I know you can do this. So that's how I remember it, Peggy. So how do you remember it?
I remember, more to the story, but I remember that the turning point was that Linda said, Peggy, if you take this job, I promise I will always take your call, which was a big deal because we were busy and we were all like, you know, practically on the dial phone, but, you know, to get through traditional medicinals, well, Linda's busy. She would always take my call. So if I was freaked out, she promised. And that was the moment. So do you want me to continue from there?
Yes, yes, I do. Yes.
That was definitely the moment. My background is similar to the other people here. My late husband, Bill BREVOORT, God rest him, and I began importing Chinese herbs from Hong Kong and mainland China as soon as the US opened trade with China, which was in the early 70s. So we started a company that was basically an importer of bulk Chinese herbs. And we were selling to Celestial and Traditionals and Sweetheart and Ben. And we were bringing in the ginseng and some of the Renshen Fenwang which was a compound, and Dong Quai and Fotai and all of these. And then realizing that we probably needed to do a little more work to present them to the American market, which knew nothing about Chinese herbs, of course. So we began making products out of them, very similar to traditional Chinese herbal products, and worked with Dr. Ted Kapchuk to develop a line of formulas. We did Chinese herbs for quite a while and then realized that we needed to do more standardization and ended up being a manufacturer of standardized herbal extracts and then expanding into standardized echinacea and many, many other things. But the background was we were passionate about Chinese herbs and kind of working in the wilderness like everyone else. I remember about the time Linda became president of AHPA was the first time I had gone to a trade association meeting. I walked in the door and I I fell in love with the concept, with the people. I felt like I had come home because so many of us had been working remotely in various parts of the country. You really didn't, unless you picked up a phone, if you had a phone. For a while, we had just a seat of landline to do our business. We were so remote. To connect with people who had, as Linda and Caroline said, this same passion for the herbs. And actually, you think you're alone in the wilderness, and walking into this trade association and seeing the power of a group of like-minded, really smart, really passionate, really devoted people all beginning to work together. It was a moment of revelation for me. I never, hippie background, I don't know, whatever. It was wonderful. And so I started to get involved. And one of the other jobs women were allowed to do was treasurer. And because I have background in accounting, I took over from Jimmy. And the wonderful thing was that we'd been collecting dues since the beginning of the association in 1982. But by 1986 or 87, we hadn't spent any money. We didn't know what to do with it. So we actually had, I recall, it was maybe $14,000 in our account. It's like, wow, look at that. We could hire an attorney to give us some advice about how to deal with FDA. We could actually, host a membership breakfast and do a couple of things. This was 14 grand. It's a lot of money in those days. And we could raise the dues so we could continue to have maybe 14 or maybe a little bit more than that to continue to grow. So I was treasurer, therefore I got to know people in the organization. And then Linda begged me, and it was partly that, and also, as she said, it would be nice to have another woman come on board. But I want to pause here, and I want to recognize also all the women who were involved in herbalism from the day one. I'm thinking of Rosemary Gladstar and Mindy Green and Feather, and we could sit here and we could name probably 50 powerful women who were so involved in being herbalists, in promoting all of these products, in growing them and selling them, and in studying, in being part of the American Herbalist, the Herbalist Guild, the American Herbalist Guild. And so in that sense, there always was a background of very powerful women who, and this has been true for centuries, it's often been the wise woman who was carrying forward a lot of this herbal knowledge. So I just want to make sure that we don't forget these gals who tended to just keep to themselves. They weren't interested in the trade association. They were interested in making products and promoting these fabulous herbs that they had discovered. So I just, I want to just remember that was there. So Linda convinced me, and I became president about the time it became very clear that we were going to need to have real legislation passed in order to protect our industry. Our industry was going to disappear, folks, because, as Linda said, there were safety issues, there were quality issues, and FDA was down our tails. And, we had a couple of attorneys we were using, and we finally could afford an attorney. And I know Lauren helped us a great deal at that time, and began to lead a charge to say, here's what you do. Because he had worked in Washington, he was an aide, I want to say, to Senator Hatch, but I couldn't say that for sure. So he had some background in the ways of politics. Well, let me tell you, I had no clue about politics. I'm a hippie in the woods, not, just kind of doing my job. It's just got to pass legislation, like gulp. How do you do that? Well, he taught us, like from Politics 101 to Politics 499, that we had to organize, we had to find our supporters, we had to get the attention of our Congress people in Washington. It turned out that Senator Hatch, because he was representing Utah, which had all the Mormons, and they were contributing to his campaign and his success, he supported his constituency. So all of a sudden, all these hippies were being asked to support Senator Hatch, who was a diehard Republican. And to realize we had to send him money, but he came through for us.
Yeah, I did.
And he helped us to, a group of people, not necessarily me, a group of people a lot smarter than I am, wrote excellent legislation, and Senator Hatch pulled strings, and the industry got together and wrote a gazillion, billion, trillion letters, SOS, save our supplements. We harassed our Congress people. And I remember, again, as we keep going back, we all kind of were hippies, the long skirts and the braids and everything. I realized I had to set that aside and pull on the pantyhose and the suit, do up my hair. Now, I might have had a bit of a low cut blouse underneath that suit, but I had on the heels and a bag, and go to Washington and go knock on the doors of these Congress people, say, hi, guess what? I'll vote for you if you'll help me, and I'll explain why. And said, oh, these herbs are not safe. And I'd have to explain why. And then, because I was at that time president of AHPA, I was called to meetings with FDA. Like, okay. But again, you went, and you kind of went in disguise almost, and sat down with these folks and listened to what FDA had to say. For a while, I was a member of the Drug Information Association, DIA. And believe me, I was the only herbalist there, but it was a valuable lesson because I learned how any substance that's being presented to the American public has to be verified for safety. Yeah, it really does, folks. We can't just be selling out whatever we pulled out of the garden last night. We got to have a little care. I learned so much, and learned that, of course, people are just people, but sometimes you have to put on a little costume or do a little dance somewhere to, and I was on first name basis with people at FDA. The attorneys were great. They got us meetings. And for 4 years, our industry, not just the herbal industry, but also the entire dietary supplement industry, worked together. And by the end of my term as AHPA president in 1994, DeShay passed. It was a long night and a lot of deal pulling, and Senator Hatch came through and pulled in favors, and it passed. And at that moment, we had a legitimate base on which to continue our future.
Absolutely amazing. And
Clapping for that one.
very exciting it was. So staying on the theme of women in the herb industry, absolutely true what you said about the herbalist tradition. And that was, I would say, 90% women. But the difference with the AHPA was, and actually the three of us, is we were part of the early women in the business of herbs. Yes. Women herbalists were, happening. The herbal renaissance was happening in the United States, and it was led by all the incredible group of female, herbalists. And within the industry, there were a lot of women in the supplement and the natural foods industry. And I want to just remind us all, and maybe Carolyn is still very present in the industry. And I'm sure, isn't it mostly women? Or, aren't there a lot more women in the natural industry and the herbal industry today than there were back in the day?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if either of you went to Expo West, but there were so many new brands started by women.
Yes.
The women entrepreneur with herbs or with natural foods, whatever one has just really come along, and women have, rocked this industry tremendously. But before we go any further, I want to acknowledge the woman who inspired me to be an herbalist. Maybe each of you can say who inspired you, but it was Juliet de Barclay-Levy.
Yes, so she's talking about Juliet, and we'll come back to her. Peggy, what was your herbal inspiration?
I think when I was very, very little, I remember walking in someone's garden, and she was pointing out that she had these plants, and I knelt down and touched thyme, and it smelled good. And it was I was just a little kid that I just knew plants were really, really special. And then I, kind of went through elementary, high school, college, whatever. I remember Gertrude Foster, who was writing books about her own herb garden in New England. And I had a chance, someone knew someone, and I had a chance to meet her and actually meet a woman who was successful in just loving the plants, growing the plants, and selling them mostly as plants to enjoy more than for usage. So I think that it was just kind of intrinsic that I've always just loved plants. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So when I was working at that New Age natural food store, I always loved telling these stories of the technology back then, right? Like we were talking about dialing phones, right? Well, anyway, they only had they had to have two different cash registers for if you were buying food that didn't have tax on it, or if you were buying books and supplements that did have tax on it. So I was in the little room called the taxable item room with all the books and the supplements and also the hair care and the beauty care and all of that, right? And I read Juliet Barclay Levy's books, and it completely turned me on. She turned me on as a woman. That woman traveled all over the world. She had Afghan hounds and she had owls and she had, a menagerie. Plus she had 2 children, and we don't know exactly where that man went. He seemed to come and go and never stay around. And she wrote these fabulous stories about her herbal adventures. And I thought to myself, again, I probably was like at 19 or 20 at this point. I thought, if she can live that life, so can I. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important for we women to tell our stories, right? Is because we inspire that next generation. So she inspired me. And like you say, I ended up, okay, so I'm an herbalist, but I'm not an herbalist, a practicing herbalist. I'm a businesswoman herbalist. I make herbal products, right? And I know about them, but I'm not sitting there, in a clinic type setting, and never have, right? But never, so I ended up with a very different life path than Juliet's, but in some ways similar because, and I did go off, by the way, and I found her in the Balearic Islands, and I then found her in Greece, and I traveled with her and all kinds of stuff. And then Rosemary brought her here to the United States, which was what I wanted to do forever, but Juliet kept not coming. And it took Rosemary actually going there, putting her on a plane and flying with her, which is what I should have done. But at any rate, it's just a phenomenal story of women and how we inspire each other. And your stories both totally inspired me. And you always have inspired me as I've watched you during my career and watching you two during yours, total inspiration. And I think that's what women do really well for each other.
Yes, I one of the things, and because I'm not actively in this industry, I do work with herbal companies in Northern California now, but I don't attend trade shows that much anymore, and I don't have an herbal company in the industry. I'm unaware of women's groups, but maybe you all remember, we got together in the 80s and 90s, and AWIN, Association for Women in Natural, was formed. We had little subgroups, wonderful working women, and we all got together at trade shows and had dinners and then formal meetings. I don't know if women's associations are happening so much right now in the industry, but as you say, Carolyn, it is so important, and it was so important back then for us to support each other and answer very basic questions like, do I look okay enough to go to the FDA meeting? Help me out here, and also running our companies. I think that there is a difference in how women look at companies and groups. I know that when I was president of traditional medicinals, I was very focused on employee families and employee health and how to nurture the health of our employees, company lunches, and starting things like more nurturing aspects to the business of having employees. And I do think that's something that women early on brought into the colder business world.
Yeah.
Was it that way for you, Peggy? Did you have a lot of women at your company?
Yeah, it was pretty well balanced because Bill and I owned and ran the company together. So I think there was less of that, men, although the women tended to be, the secretaries and although there were women working out on the floor of the manufacturing and so forth. The other thing I remember when you mentioned AWIN is, I remember at the Council for Responsible Nutrition, Annette Dickinson, how powerful and influential, smart, wonderful woman she was, who was a powerful woman in a very male-orientated trade association. And I also remember the NNFA, there was a woman whose name I cannot remember, who was their president for a while. So that they're Pat.
Mhm.
Somebody, yes, forgive me, Pat. Yes, that there were, I think by the nature of the beast, if you will, the fact that herbs are nourishing, dietary supplements are nourishing, food, health, and so forth. Women, that's part of how we're put together very often, and so that there were more women, but we weren't used to being in charge. And sometimes I think the guys were just really busy. And it's like a woman says, well, someone's got to get the job done. And no one's going to be president. Okay, all right, I'll do that. You're balancing all this other stuff. And I also remember when, as Linda mentioned, a lot of times you'd be in a meeting and you really were the only gal, 10 or 12 guys, all, puffing their peacock feathers and trying to see who was going to be in charge. It's just so much fun to watch. And, I felt I came in as like, God, I'm really at the bottom of the heap here. And they have to ask me because I'm president of AHPA and I got to be here. And feeling intimidated, and then realizing I had nowhere to go but up. And so what the heck? I had a question or I had a comment, raise my hand. They do have to acknowledge me, or I'd say, excuse me. And I just opened my mouth and asked the question. It couldn't be any more foolish than being quiet and thinking I was a fool woman. I might as well open my mouth, and then becoming part of the group in that way. And so I just remember that as a moment within the, in the whole dance of things.
Yeah. So I think we all have earned our moment to give advice to the women, one bit of advice to the women that are in the herb world, any part of the big umbrella of the herb world, because now we have scientists and we have lawyers and we have women doing absolutely every aspect within the herb industry and the herb world. So I'll just do mine and I want to hear yours. Get involved in the trade associations. And it's a whole alphabet now of herbal nonprofit trade associations. Do your volunteer work, get in there and support them. Support associations. I feel like we need more women in them. We need more people in them. And it is part of that community, and women bring invaluable skills and energy to it. So that's my little quirk. Carolyn, you got one?
That's a perfect one. I love that. But I'll go like in a slightly different direction, which is I say, because I've been sourcing herbs all my life, right? Well, all my career, get involved with the women that are in your supply chain and help them raise up. So, and I'll just give you an example of what we do. I work with communities in the Maya Biosphere Reserve because one of our ingredients is collected there. And so I've been working in there's a number of villages involved, but the one that I've worked in the longest, which I started with in 2005, the women would never come forward, and it was always the men, and the women were back here and whatnot. And I just took my son there in January. My son works with me in the business, and he was young in 2004, still in school. And now, so here, fast forward these years later, and those women are now in positions of authority running what's called the concession, their government permission to be there and to extract the non-timber products from the forest, they're all in the positions of authority and they're running the place. So just like you two said, you know, when women step forward into these jobs and get involved, but they have to feel empowered. And one of the ways that they feel empowered is when they have an opportunity to earn money. And the herb trade offers women the opportunity to earn money, whether they're in this country, starting a company like we all have, or whether they're in our supply chain in a developing country where they can go out and pick herbs, you know, and getting people still to do wild harvested herbs is a huge part of our industry and a part that I hope to work on increasingly with AHPA, because it's, you know, well, first off, we've got the war in the Ukraine, which is messing up Eastern Europe incredibly. And that's a scary subject unto itself. But also just around the world, in our own country here in Appalachia, not many people are going out and collecting. We have to get people involved in the harvesting of herbs again, and women are the way to go after that. So that's what I say.
That's inspiring. Peggy.
Well, I'll take a slightly different tact again, and I would say to women, well, to anyone, but particularly to women, follow your passion. So oftentimes we're told what we should do or what's the right thing to do. And I think that's less true today than it used to be. But it doesn't matter what it is. It maybe it's screwy. Maybe it doesn't directly have anything to do with herbs, but somehow it gets you. Like I say, when I walked into that first AHPA meeting, I came alive. I just knew that there was something I needed to do there. And I had, you know, really no support from my company. I certainly had no background in trade associations, politics, or anything like that. And I wasn't really even an herbalist. I was just helping kind of run a business that we were importing herbs. But I just saw the power of that group. And I didn't know where it was going to lead, but that's what I wanted to do. And it doesn't matter what it is. You want to get a PhD, you want to go teach children somewhere in a third world country. Doesn't matter. Follow your passion and the rest will follow that.
Wow. Yeah. So I think we're kind of closing. So if you know, if either of you have a closing word, I do want to continue to thank, because I love AHPA so much. I thank Michael McGuffin every day because he has brought us for so long, so far. I really feel like AHPA is today a lot because of Michael's incredible work, you know, his dedication and his brilliance. So this to Michael McGuffin, who I adore. And
I echo that absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
his leadership has meant everything, really. AHPA has just, it's done so much. I mean, when you look at all the way we've come in, all the volunteers, you know, all the people from the various companies who have volunteered their time and put forth their work and their energy and their talent and their knowledge and combined it. Because when we form a group, we are stronger than ever. And that's what AHPA did. It formed a group, and that group has made us all stronger than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. When I've gone back to do something with AHPA, I'm overwhelmed by the committees in the organization and the results that they have managed, that Michael has managed to create this very complex, very knowledgeable, very professional group. And I remember when Michael was elected to the board, I was the president. He came to his first meeting and he's a brand new board member, and he said, I think there's some opportunities here. He coined that, and that has been the go word from that point forward.
oh yeah. Oh, thank you, beautiful ladies. And I love you. I love you. Mwah.
It's so nice to see your lovely faces. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really special moment with the two of you.
Yeah.
All right.
I learned some things. I didn't know quite all of that. And I'm sure if we got off camera, we'd have even more things to talk about.
Well, yeah, I think this tea party might turn into the after hours party.
Yes, exactly.
You know, one thing I thought about talking about, it doesn't really fit into what we've just done, but I want to acknowledge you, Lynda, because I was working for one of the Mormon companies, Nature's Herbs, and I had just come back from Europe, and I was working on how to label herb products, right? So that they could say what they were, right? And so that they could say, and I started working with the same concept of, well, let's call an active ingredient or something like this on the label. And you at that time were really going into the OTC. So it was the same thing. I was studying OTC labeling, and so were you. And I remember seeing your labels coming out and thinking, oh, that's a good idea there. You know, you were really leading the way on that with that. And I didn't know that you had that pharmaceutical background, you know,
Yes.
from
Yes.
you, but
That
there
was-
it was.
That was huge. You did an enormous thing that I don't think you've ever gotten total credit for, to
Yep.
go in and get those that OTC work done for traditionals. That was amazing. And at the time, no one even understood what you were
I
doing.
know. I was a bit ahead of my time.
And it was huge because you got claims, you got legitimate claims.
I
on
wish
it.
we had known each other then, because I knew what you were doing. You know, coming from Europe where I'd been for 4 years, I knew what their labels were all about too. And I was like, wait a second, we got to get this labeling thing together here in the United States. So, you know, really appreciate that you really forged ahead on that and took it much farther than I was able to.
I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. Unsung there praise for that was huge.
Thank you. That's why we love each other too, because our girlfriends do sing our stories for us, you know.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. Yeah. Cool.
Good, good. Well, I didn't want to end the conversation without acknowledging that. And there wasn't a moment in our rest of our conversation to say it, but it's really, really true. And that labeling part was such an important part of the whole conceptualization of our industry as something that could actually make some kind of claim about how great these herbs were for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You bet.
Okay.
All right.
I think we're over.
Wow, that was truly amazing. Thank you so much to each of these incredible ladies for being with us today and sharing your stories. It's so amazing to see how far we've come, and I'm grateful to be a part of AHPA's ongoing commitment to women in leadership. On behalf of Linda, Peggy, and Caroline, thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for more AHPA Herb Talks to come.